Welcome, I am the Novice Woodworker, and today I've got a little project for my drill press. I'm going to build a drill press stand, and I got the plans from Fix This, Build That. They were like $7, I think. Pretty detailed plans, detailed steps. He also does a video on his YouTube channel, which I will link below. So props to him for doing that video, inspiring me to build my own channel and providing the plans to help me figure out how to do so. All right, let's get started. So the first thing I'm doing is grabbing a full sheet of 3/4 plywood, and I look at the plans to lay out all of the cut lines at once. This is the first time I'm using plans somebody else made, so I hadn't realized at this point that putting all of the cut lines down right up against each other is not the best plan. Not taking the saw kerf into account ends up putting a few of my measurements off by the width of the saw blade, which is about 1/8 of an inch on my table saw. So it seemed like a good idea at the time, but after I got all the pieces cut out, I started noticing some things were not lining up correctly or a little bit off and not quite square. And now it's time to cut out all the pieces that I laid out on the plywood. I used a circular saw to make the cuts on the full sheet of plywood in order to break it down into smaller pieces. Unfortunately, I must have lost the video on me doing that step. Don't do this. This is a bad example. If a piece is wider than it is long, it should be cut using either a crosscut sled or on the miter saw. At the time, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was just trying to get familiar with my table saw and dial in the length on these pieces, or the width on these pieces. I should have used the miter saw. Back to using the table saw correctly. Here I'm just finishing up cutting out all the remaining drawer pieces that'll be used to make the 5 drawers in the drill press stand. Once I've got all the pieces cut out, I lay them out in groups and label at least the top piece according to the cut list. The main box and the drawers are all going to be held together with pocket screws. So I grabbed my Craig pocket hole jig and got to work drilling out a bunch of holes in a lot of pieces. The first step to assembling the drill stand is to add the bottom to the 2 sides using pocket holes. Pocket holes generally are classified as an easy way to assemble furniture, if you've done it a few times. This is my first experience using pocket holes, and as you can tell by the way that I'm having trouble with getting this screw into the side panel of this drill press stand, it's easy after you've done it a couple of times. What I should have done is placed the side on my assembly table and used gravity to my advantage. Unfortunately, I didn't have an assembly table at the time, and my table saw was the only truly flat surface that I had. So I didn't want the screw to go through the side of the plywood and go into the table saw, which is why I decided to try and assemble it this way. I don't remember why I decided it was a good idea to flip the stand around in order to put the pocket screws on the bottom half of how I had it set up before. I'm sure I had a good reason at the time. In hindsight, I don't think it was good enough and I should have just left it, but here we are. Now it's time to attach the stretchers or stringers to the top of the sides. These will help the box keep its shape and some rigidity as far as like racking, so it won't wobble side to side. As you can see, I'm still having trouble with pocket holes. After going through the problems that I had with the pocket screws on the last 2 pieces, I thought maybe I could pre-screw the pocket screws in and have the point sticking out a little bit. This might help the screw dig into the other piece of plywood easier, there wouldn't be as much separation as I was screwing the two pieces together. That's not the case. But let's watch me figure that out anyway. And here is the eureka moment. I finally figured out that using a clamp to hold the piece in place and apply pressure to both sides that I'm trying to screw this stringer into is a good idea. Okay, buddy. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just shop furniture. Let's go. Come on. You can do it. There we go. Let's speed this up a little bit. It's only pocket screws. The next step is to attach the back of the stand. For this, I'm using glue and brad nails. So I'm laying down a bead of glue, placing the back piece, and squaring up one corner. I attach that one corner, that's square, and move along the side to make sure at least one side is flush with the carcass. After that, finish it off with some nails. With that done, I can set it aside and let the glue dry and move on to assembling the drawers. Each drawer is held together with a few pocket screws, and it depends on the size of the drawer. On the larger drawer, I ended up using 3 pocket screws per side, and on the smaller drawers, I used 2. Now I can add some glue to the bottom of each drawer and nail the drawer bottom into place. I cut the drawer bottoms a little bit long on a few sides so that I could go back and route with a flush trim bit to make sure that all the bottoms were even with the edges of the drawers. Now I can mark the drawer slide placement and lose the footage of me installing them. Moving on. I use a small spacer at the bottom of the drawer in order to create enough space so that the drawer is not rubbing against the bottom of the stand. Then I take a pencil and mark the edge of the drawer slides on the drawer side. Pull out the drawer and the spacer so it doesn't wobble, as well as the drawer slides. Line up the slide with the mark I made with the pencil and begin screwing the drawer slide into the side of the drawer. After the first screw on the slide on each side is installed, I pull the drawer out even further, find the second spot for the slide screws and install those. And then I do the same for the third spot for the screws in the slide. Installing the remaining drawers is the same process as the first. I just use a different size spacer for these ones. To install the drawer fronts, you need to make sure there's enough space between them so they don't catch on each other. In this case, I used the instructions from this build because I didn't have any playing cards or spacers. Using a couple clamps, I can hold the drawer face to the drawer itself, pull it out, make sure it doesn't catch real quick, and then install it with a few screws from the back side. Here the bottom drawer face is already installed. It's the same process, but instead of using a spacer, I lined up the bottom of the drawer face with the bottom of the stand itself. Quick quality check, and we're good. Time for a little sanding, and in most cases on YouTube, that means it's time to talk about today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is me. Just me. I bought everything. It's all my stuff. Nobody sponsored me. Let's make it mobile. Got a small shop, so I gotta make sure everything can be moved around. I grabbed some locking casters from the local big box store, pre-drilled some holes, added a few screws to each caster, made sure they didn't catch in the bottom drawer, and Bob's your uncle. Let's make the top a little bit prettier. The first step is grabbing a few pieces of poplar that I grabbed from the same big box store and mitering a few ends. On the first piece, I cut it to the exact length of the first side that I'm going to glue together. So I put some glue on the edge of the plywood top, place the piece of poplar on it, and wonder what I was thinking. Perhaps I thought the glue would be a little bit tackier, or maybe that I could balance this and then add the pocket screws somehow with balancing it. But no, that's not going to work. This is another job for clamps. Now I understand why woodworkers on YouTube are always saying you can never have enough clamps. So I grabbed a couple to hold the edge piece in place while I put the pocket screws in and let the glue set. Because I was using a continuous strip of poplar, I always had one mitered edge. So I could take that mitered edge, hold it up against the previous edge piece that I installed, and use that as a way to measure where my next miter cut should be. Then I could take it to the miter saw, sneak up on the miter, cut it, come back to the piece, add some glue, put the clamps on first this time, and then use pocket screws to secure it in place. All the remaining edges were just following the same steps. Take the mitered edge, butt it up to the previous piece, measure, mark, take it back to the miter saw, cut, glue, and screw. And here we go with the final piece being added. Some pocket screws to hold it in place. And the top is done. Well, finished except for sanding. And sanding, you know what that means. Sponsorships or promos. So, do I have a new sponsor or promo? No, I don't. So just enjoy some sped up sanding. Okay, we're almost finished. All that's left is adding some drawer hardware and a little bit of finishing if you want. The first step is to find the center of the drawer. At least that's where I wanted the pulls to be in my case. So I marked the center vertically and horizontally, and then grabbed my Craig drawer jig. The second step is realizing that with the jig, you have to mark in a different spot, not the top of the drawer. Now that we've got it all lined up, the third step is realizing you need a clamp to hold the jig onto the drawer face. One of these days, I'm going to learn my lesson. Clamps are life when you're a woodworker. Almost there. There we go. Now that the jig is in place, we can drill the pilot holes for the hardware screws, remove the jig, and then insert the screws from the back or inside of the drawer and screw the drawer hardware on. And that's it. Now you can repeat the same process for all the remaining drawers. And here's the finished product. I ended up putting a couple coats of polyurethane on just on the top because it's gonna be in my shop the whole time. It doesn't have to look pretty. Hope you had fun watching the video. I enjoyed, for the most part, making this. Thanks to Brad from Fix This Build That for giving out the plans. Well, not giving them, having the plans available. It's a nice, easy project to get started with. It's something I needed anyway. It actually added a lot of storage that I didn't have before for drill bits and all that, sort of like the jigs that I bought. So it was a good time. It was a good learning experience, and that's really what I'm looking for as I get into this hobby. If you have any comments, suggestions, critiques, I'm happy to hear them. Leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.